Hello, welcome back to our podcast, What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. I'm here in the studio with my friends and colleagues.
Red Keating.
And David Kennedy.
And I'm Julie Brown. Nice to be with you guys again.
Yeah. And tonight, this is, I think, going to be a very intimate, helpful, important discussion that we are about to explore. And I want to thank you, Julie, for your willingness to be open and honest with us. As we talk about it, and where we're going tonight is around the whole piece of the journey with a cancer diagnosis. What does it mean to be diagnosed with that word and that idea and that disease, knowing what we know and the proliferation of that in our society? We always have connections with that and where our mind goes immediately. So tonight we want to talk about that, and we want to talk about it ways, in very personal ways, and Julie will explain that in a moment. But thank you for being able to do that. So this is just going to be our chance to look at this at various points. And I know that people, as you listen, I trust that you will find some solace and some strength as you listen to this discussion, and find things that are going to be helpful in your journey or the journey of somebody that you love and share with.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting. It feels, Julie, like you're almost like our guest tonight, which is a strange thing. But anyway, it will evolve. But I think before we hit record, we were just talking about the time, Julie, before your diagnosis, and you had a bout of food poisoning. And I remember we were out for dinner one night, and it was just your stomach was sore, and it was food poisoning. David, you had just had a recent lunch with her, and it was this sense that there was a bout of food poisoning, but it turned out not to be food poisoning, did it? And I do remember that it was a relatively emergent and a situation of emergency. And I'm wondering, Julie, can you just sort of take us back to that time when you went from home to hospital?
Yeah, for sure. And, thanks for the space to talk about this tonight. It does feel important to tell our stories, doesn't it? So I thank both of you and for the people who will listen to this episode. So yeah, I had been feeling ill progressively for weeks prior to diagnosis. I had a diagnosed case of food poisoning. Lots of people say they have food poisoning, but this public health unit actually investigated this one. My colleagues and I were ill from a luncheon. And I just thought it was the longer term effects of that, because I didn't really properly bounce back, and I became sicker and sicker. And I went to my doctor, and he took it seriously, and he ordered tests, and he ordered a scan, and it didn't actually properly show up on the scan because it was colon cancer. And I've since learned that colon cancer doesn't always properly show up on a scan. That's why we should all get our colonoscopies. But what happened is I had a bowel blockage, and I had it for several weeks, and became, I had immense pain and abdominal pain. And interestingly, a lot of people in my life thought it was stress, because I had been promoted to a new leadership position at my place of employment, and people just thought it was the stress of that position. And it was a pretty stressful job. And we had just had a tragic death happen of my boss's spouse at the organization. So there was legitimately a lot of stress, and I had kind of overnight been kind of taken on, like, kind of running the organization at that time. And so I also was minimizing the pain. And then it got so excruciating that I just knew there was a moment of clarity that I just went, something is wrong, and something is really wrong. And I said to my husband, we have to go to the emergency room right now. And when I got there, I can remember saying to the triage nurse who wrote something down about me having like some abdominal pain and cramps. And I said, no, that's not what this is. Like, we're so far past this. Something is really wrong with me. And I said to her, you don't know me, but I'm just telling you, I know myself, and something is really wrong. And so then over the course of that evening, they called in a consult for the surgeon. They did an X-ray, they did another CT scan, and then something started to show up. And the surgeon started to say, could be cancer, was careful about that. It is a bowel blockage. It's likely cancer. We won't know. And then from there, everything started to unfold. There was an emergency colonoscopy the next day. And then I was on the emergency list for surgery. And, I was very ill. And even after I did have the emergency surgery really late the next night, that's still a real pivotal moment for me around feeling the realness of my own mortality, sitting there going into that as they went through the risks with my husband and I. And then I continued to actually be quite ill I was in a constant care unit for the first couple days. I wasn't able to eat or drink. They had to dissect my colon, take out part of it. So I ended up with a colonoscopy, which, as you can imagine, waking up and finding that out felt very difficult.
Did you mean colostomy?
The colostomy.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. The colostomy. And then, through it all, like all of us, when we get shocking news, I just started to feel really numb. I can remember texting you in the hospital, David, saying, if you're around the hospital, could you come visit me? Because I'm here. And then it began, right?
And I think that's a great phrase. And then it began. And we were talking about our podcast is on the threshold. And this is a threshold. That diagnosis changes life. And I think, for many people, they look at their life as pre-cancer and then everything after, because that it is such a defining moment in so many ways, not just physically, but as you've alluded to, the emotional challenges, the spiritual challenges, everything has that beginning point when that diagnosis happens.
So true.
And you said something, you maybe for the first time faced a sense of mortality. For us, we think death is somewhere down the road. It's in the future. We know it's going to happen, but we put it out of our mind. But when you cross that threshold and you walk into that room or into that space and mortality is sitting in a chair saying, hey, we're just waiting for you. Welcome. That's a room. It's hard, it's not easy to walk into that room, and you sort of you're just pushed into it. You don't voluntarily go into that room. You just get pushed into it, and you got pushed.
So help us with how long did that? I mean, there must that shock, that initial. I can't even imagine all of this stuff that's going on. How long did that last? What's that first stage, if we were to use that word? What are we talking about there?
It was actually many weeks, the full shock. I started to have big feelings and emotions right away, of course. The thing I remember the most is and I couldn't put this word to it for a really long time, but was the terror I felt in my body. And the terror showed up where everything now felt dangerous in my world. So if I was going to drink something, is that good for me or is it bad for me? Should I eat that food or not that food? They were worried about another bowel blockage with my colostomy, right? But then I had this whole idea of cancer, it's cancer of the colon. That could be something that I've been eating or not eating. I can remember somebody bringing me something to drink in a plastic glass from Starbucks and thinking, should I be drinking out of a plastic glass? And so my mind was running in this, right? It was in threat detection response. It feels like there's danger everywhere in the world, but I don't know what's dangerous. Because the danger is also in my body and I can't get away from my body, but it also feels like the danger maybe came from outside in the world, but I don't know where the danger is. So I had this, my threat detection system was on high alert, but I was still trying to be Julie. People would come and visit me and I would talk with them and we would have conversations. But I had this whole other running dialogue in me that was so heightened. I almost can't find the words to fully just describe what that was like. And it took many weeks, and I can still remember one of the moments where it started to wear off and my house was empty. And I actually screamed. and I let myself scream for a little bit because I just felt like it had been building and building. And the scream was like a scream of terror, like, you know, like of all the emotion that had been building in me that I was trying to protect the people in my life from, but probably also needing to protect myself from. And then over time, you know, it starts to settle in, right? As you start to go to the oncology, you start to get your port put in, you start your chemo. And then all of a sudden, you're in the cancer world, right? I can still remember a group of people sent me a cancer quilt. And a friend sent me a picture of their kid saying, I'm running for Julie on Terry Fox Day. And me going, I don't want that. And they were being supportive, but I'm like, I wanted to reject that. I don't want somebody to be running for me on Terry Fox Day. But now I'm actually part of that group now, and people are running for me.
And I've heard that you said a couple of things there, Julie, that I have heard many times from people with that diagnosis of cancer. The first one is that sense of, it's somewhere in my body. Why can't I just reach in there and pull it out? You know, what is this thing that has invaded me now? And it's inside, and why can't we just get that and get it out of there, and then I'll be fine, right? So, and that's the one piece. The other is that in that initial shock pushes us to that end, right? That because we've equated now that, thank God you're here. Mm-hmm. You mm-hmm. didn't die. Mm-hmm. And that's true for many people who have a diagnosis of cancer. It's not, but our mind goes there, that this means perhaps my mortality is coming to an end. And
I asked for the numbers.
Right.
I wasn't, some people don't want to know the numbers, but I asked for the numbers in my first oncology appointment. So what are my chances of survival? What are the chances of, you know, if I do all my treatment, of the chances of reoccurrence? If it reoccurs, what's my prognosis like? I knew the numbers. Mm-hmm. One thing I did not do, and I do recommend this, I did not research, I did not Google. If there was something I needed to know, I would ask one of my people and say, here's something I need to know. Will you look it up and tell me what I need to know? So I tried really hard not to go down rabbit holes on the internet because I knew that wouldn't be good for me. But I was somebody that wanted to know the numbers. And of course, I have those numbers etched in my mind. I could recite those the way other people could recite their phone number. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I just go back just a bit, because I'm catching a little bit of something there, in that you were talking about your threat. You know, your threat response was high, mm-hmm. and someone brought something to you in a plastic glass, and you were wondering, is that a threat? Mm-hmm. Was there any sense that this was your fault, that you were somehow responsible for your own
of course,
cancer?
Red. Of course, so much. And to be honest, I still have moments of that. I've had to really work that through. And thankfully, I have people in my life like you guys and others where I had to kind of deconstruct it in my mind, because my mind would go to the things that, quote, I shouldn't do, right? Like, oh, here are all the things that mean I live a healthy life. Here are some of the things I've done, still do, that mean I don't live such a healthy life. So, you know, because the mind starts to try to do the math, right? Where's the blame? Where's the threat? Who's caused what? And some of that I've come to understand now is we want to get control back. And so if I can figure out where the threat came from, then I have some more control, right? And so if I can figure it out that it was because I eat too much red meat because I grew up in a meat and potatoes house when I grew up, or because I like my red wine, or because it's this or because it's that, then, you know, then maybe I know where the threat is. The thing is cancer, any illness, is not that one-dimensional. We want to believe it is, and I'm sure all of us have worked with clients, and I have a client right now where, you know, we want to believe that it's just like, if you do this, then that means you're protected from this. And we know that that's not true. And the three of us know that from the people we work with, that people who are really healthy have heart attacks, right? People who live what, quote, all of us think is the way to live, die young. We see that. And so I have had to walk myself back from that and say, yeah, I don't live a perfect, healthy life. I certainly didn't as a teenager and a young adult, but I also do care about my life, and I do care about my body. And I had to come to a place of, and I truly believe this, that cancer is very complex and multidimensional, and and it's not that simple. Right. It's not that simple.
I used to have a cartoon, and I hate referencing things that I can't remember where they came from, but it was a great little cartoon, and it was a guy at the pearly gates of heaven, and St. Peter's there with his clipboard, and he's checking off the list, and it says, oh yeah, non-smoker, non-drinker, healthy diet, regular exercise. St. Peter turns and says, you really gave it a good shot, didn't you? And here you are. But that sense of somehow I brought this upon myself, right? And then
trying to assign blame, like where does the blame belong? Where, like, let's do the math. Where does the responsibility belong so we can put it there? I will say I had some really great people in my life who were really quick to reassure me, just like from their perspective. And I needed that. I needed to hear from people say, you know what, like, we see you and we see how you've lived, and this is not on you. And I needed that normalizing, because I was also a mother of young children at that point. And so to think that I had done something that had in some way jeopardized their mother for their sake brought up a lot of guilt for me.
And that was the piece I was just going to ask you about, because I think, in that threshold, as we begin this chapter of that journey, it's not just us that we are consumed with; it's the people around us that we love. That those play huge games in our mind too, don't they?
I had 2 surgeries, and it's the thing I said to my surgeons when I was rolled into the OR both times. And the first thing I said to my oncologist, I have young kids. They need their mother. Trying to, like, make me real to them. It's like, I want you to see me as a human being. And if you feel connected to me as a human being, maybe you will want to take really good care of me.
Wow, that's a great point, because we've all heard that piece around some, people say sometimes I feel just another number in this, right? And I'm another cancer patient. And I think what you just said there, Julie, is to maintain our humanity in the midst of that labeling. That may be the overarching label, but it cannot define who we are. You are Julie living with cancer, not a cancer person. But that's hard to get to, because it's all consuming when you first are there in that first piece.
I will say it was all hard. There were almost no moments where it didn't feel hard. It was hard work. It was hard work emotionally. It was hard work physically. It was the weight of carrying the death anxiety, of the fear of abandoning my children, or that they would experience me as abandoning them if I, it was all hard. It never felt easy. Or not easy. It never got easier. It felt hard the whole way through.
And what was really helpful? What did others do during that period that really for you was okay? That was good.
Yeah, it's so clear to me. It's that they didn't make me be otherwise than how I was. So if it was a messy moment, that people allowed me to be messy, and by that I just mean crying or feeling really vulnerable. In fact, I became very rigid about who I let into my house. If I felt like they were people that would need me to be okay, like would need me to be like, I'm just thinking positive. And, I was like, I can't be with you. Like, I have to just show up as who I am in the way that I was going to do that. So what helped was, like, truly, it was love, and it was no judgment. It was feeling like, and as time went by, like, the people I just spent more and more time with were the people that I felt the most were not judging me and were just loving me through it. Like, it was just like, there was just like a purity of how they just held me through that space.
And what did you do for yourself? Did you write? Did you try to exercise? What was your motive?
I tried to write. I tried to meditate because, of course, I had a meditation practice going into it. But quite honestly, I actually couldn't most of the time because I felt too overwhelmed by my own internal world. Like I would feel flooded. And, we know that that's a contraindication for meditation with people who have trauma. So I did have a friend who I could meditate with. And so I would meditate with her. I did some writing, but again, I found that very flooding as well. And so, like I talked a lot. There were a few core people that I didn't hold it in. I talked. I did a lot of puzzles. I almost always had a puzzle going because that felt like that would give me something to do that didn't feel super hard. I just started to have these kind of really loose schedules to my week. And as I said on another podcast episode, I learned very quickly that I couldn't really be alone for long periods of time. I was too flooded in my own trauma at the time. And I did feel like some people judged me for it way out on my periphery of my circles, but the people in my inner circle, I didn't feel judged for. And I just was like, this is what I need. I say that very cavalierly now, but it felt actually excruciatingly hard to ask for. Like, please don't leave me alone. I don't want to be alone for long periods of time. I was afraid of falling. I was afraid of something bad happening because the chemo really impacted my balance. I had really severe neuropathy with that in my feet, in my hands, in my jaw, different parts of my body. But more of it was just like emotionally. So what helped was really like love and support. And I am so aware that so many people don't get that the way I did. And I felt like at times like I am holding on to the life preserver that they are throwing to me, and yet I still feel like I'm being banged around and tossed by the waves. And I thought so often of the clients that I have supported through the years that like didn't have that, or the people that I know in my life that didn't have that. Now maybe some of them didn't need it the way that I did, but I needed it.
Well, that's everybody's journey is different, and everybody is an individual. Could you? I remember there's a couple things you've said there, but the treatment phase. So you're home. You've screamed out into the empty house of terror, in terror. But I remember the chemotherapy regimen roller coaster. Can you speak a little bit about like that? Because, you hear that, and I think this is, something that people can connect with. And what's that like? Because you just start feeling a little bit better again, and another round comes up.
Yeah. So first what I want to say is one of the things you learn is there's many different types of chemo, just like there's many different kinds of cancer. So when people start to tell you like, oh, my neighbor had chemo, well, chances are it's not the same kind of chemo, maybe the same dosage. So like there's different, like routines of it, protocols of it. And one thing I came to learn is that like our cancer system here in Ontario, it's very protocolized. So, people would say, oh, you should go see such and such an oncologist. And it's like, well, the way they're going to do my chemo is the way they're going to do it, given, the staging and the my kind of cancer. And so, yeah, it's just like what you say, Red. It's like I can remember feeling like every round had a couple hurdles to jump. The first one would be the blood draw, and then you would see your oncologist, and they would determine your numbers, like is your hemoglobin, is your white blood cell count, are your numbers in where they need to be in order to go ahead with chemo. And then comes the chemo, and they load you up on a bunch of medications, and it took us about 3 or 4 rounds before we figured out the right anti-nausea medications and whatnot. But then my nausea was well controlled after about the 3rd or 4th round. Then there's actually the chemo, and going into the chemo room, having your infusion. And then I had 2 different kinds. So there would be the chemo I'd have that day, and then they'd hook me up to a fanny pack. And then for the next 48 hours, then I was having the other chemo. And then a home care nurse would come and detach me from that. And I had a port installed. And so then the next one, my good friend Karen nicknamed the Badlands, because what would happen is then I would crash. I actually sometimes would do okay during the first few days of chemo because you're on steroid medications, which help with your energy, which help with just, like they help manage some of the symptoms, and your anti-nausea medication. And then you go off the steroids, and then we call those the Badlands. And what I figured out after a few rounds is I was crashing from the chemo, but I was also crashing from the steroids, right? Because they're very powerful drugs. And so then I just have several days where I almost felt like I've never had drug withdrawal, but I felt like I was going through withdrawal, and then I would just feel horrible. And it felt miserable, like misery. It felt like misery. And I can remember thinking, like, 5 minutes only just went by. Oh, I still have 4 hours to bedtime. I just want it to be nighttime so I can sleep, so that I can put in more time. The days felt excruciatingly long. I actually remember David and you and I talking about it, me saying, like, David, the time feels like my enemy because my days felt so long. And then you would start to come out of it. I would feel okay, and then we'd start up. And then this weird thing happens with chemo, is that then they start to really take it, as the chemo rounds go on, your different blood levels of things start to drop. And if they get dangerously low, then you can't go ahead with chemo. So then very quickly, I actually wasn't having anxiety about the chemo like I did it for the first couple rounds. I actually started to have anxiety about not getting chemo, because at one point my chemo was stopped for a whole month because my white blood cell count was so low. And then I was at very high risk for sickness and infection, right? So then I started to have anxiousness about, well, what if the cancer is growing and, like, there's no chemo going into my body? So then it started to be this dual, like, I'm afraid of the chemo, but I'm afraid to not get the chemo. And then, of course, as we all know, the whole idea is that the chemo, intensifies in your body. It starts to fill your body up. So by the time I was going in for my 12th round, it's like I felt like my body was full of chemo. And there started not to be really any days where I started to feel well between those last few rounds. And then that was, we were going into December then, and I remember thinking, I just need to get through December. Like, every day is just going to be hard in December until basically I'm done.
Right. Mm-hmm. You used a word there back at neuropathy, and I'm just wondering if we should explain what that is.
Yeah, it's a nerve pain. Chemotherapy can actually, and there's only certain kinds of chemotherapy that do this. It can actually, it damages your nerves. And so what that would mean is, like, my hands, my feet would go completely numb. And at times it was very, very painful, very sensitive to cold. So if I picked up a glass that the water was cold, I literally would drop the glass and the glass would fall, because it would be like being zapped by lightning, touching anything cold. And I had neuropathy in my jaw. So anytime I would put a sip of water or something that was cold, or even just anything lukewarm food in my mouth, I would get that zap all through my jaw and up into my head. And that would last for the first couple days after chemo. And so that was really, it was very intense. It was very, very painful. And through it all, my oncologist was, kind of trying to monitor my dosage of chemo, knowing that in some respects, not all neuropathy is reversible. They hope it is. But, like, how far can we push this? How far can we push the neuropathy? And what she said at some point is, like, Julie, like, we're going for cure here, but I want you to have a quality of life. after this. And, you know, where is that in between where we don't do so much damage that it's going to impact your quality of life. So I do have like permanent nerve damage in my hands and my feet, but nothing. It's like it doesn't even compare to what I had at the worst of it. So I always feel like that's something I can live with.
And disclaimer again, that's not all chemotherapies result in severe neuropathy.
That's right.
It's just specific or
Yeah.
I don't know if it's too soon, but you sort of said, we want you to have a quality of life on the other side of this. And I don't know if we're ready to go to the other side of this, but, you got through all of your treatment and here we are today still. Mm-hmm. What's that like?
Yeah. I actually remember this conversation with you, David, that in the midst of my treatment, I was saying like how excruciating it was just like living through each treatment and the anxiety of it. And you said to me kindly at that point is like, that's what it is now. But after, it'll be then living through the fear of the surveillance, the scans, the appointments, the aftermath. And at the time, all I could think about was the tunnel of getting through the chemotherapy. And then after the chemotherapy, then I had another surgery, right? So that everything was focused on that. And I kind of, I couldn't look beyond that. And that's okay because we need to not look so far when the task in front of us is so daunting. But eventually, of course, the surgery was successful, the reversal, the reattachment of my colon. I come out of chemo. I start to regain my strength, actually fairly quickly, I think. I start to feel slowly a little more like myself. And then this is when a whole other part of the work starts to happen. And that's really dealing with the trauma of it. When you're in it, you're just trying to survive. And now on the other side of it, you're trying to learn how to live again. And you're trying to learn how to live with, like, pick up the pieces of your life that all went on hiatus, like returning to work, being a more active friend and wife and parent again. And then, but you feel different. And I think of one of my clients who said to me after their journey with breast cancer, said, I just felt broken. I felt shattered. And that's exactly how I felt. And still do, in not often anymore, but still have waves of that where I still feel like at that time felt very broken inside, very fragmented, fractured.
And and yet in the middle of that, and I remember having this conversation too with you, Julie, saying, your body is amazing. It's fighting. It's doing everything it can for you. Mm-hmm. And it's broken in the way in which it's been attacked, but your body is amazingly responding the best it can. And I think giving ourselves that sense of, okay, I can be hard on it, I can be angry that I've got this cancer, but you know what? Everything within me is doing what it's supposed to be doing, trying its best to overcome this. Mm-hmm. And I can't be angry at my body because it's really trying to do this mm-hmm. work.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
What's the role of trust for you now? I think of folks that I've been speaking with in the past, and we talk about thresholds, and I said you get pushed into this room, right? And then treatment is over, and hey, everything's done. And now you're pushed into another room, which is the rest of your life room, so to speak. Mm-hmm. What's the role that trust plays now in terms of your health?
Well, initially, as this will come as no surprise, every bump, pain, ache, symptom, cough, frightened me. Everything did. You end up wanting to go to your doctor constantly. I have a very wonderful doctor, and he was very kind to me. I actually didn't go to him a lot because I would try really hard just to and my husband was great at this, where I would kind of bring him the symptom and say, like, is this my anxiety, or is this something that we need to pay attention to? Because I just knew I couldn't rely on my own kind of perceptions, because I knew I was skewed. I knew it was like there was a lot of trauma sitting there. And so, but you're carrying fear all the time, right? Like if I would cough a lot in a day, I'd think, oh, I think I'm coughing more. What if the cancer's in my lungs, right? Or I have this low backache, and for all of us who work in this field, we hear those stories, right? Of people who it went undetected, and, just because they had a persistent, ache in their hip or this or that. And so then, I did go through a period where my hips ached all the time because I walked constantly in my recovery, and in the first lockdown of COVID, my hips were really tight, and I started to get really scared because they were throbbing all the time. And it was like, I know this is probably from the walking, but what if? Mm-hmm. And that's what you start to hold all the time. And I can remember, and this still happens, although not as frequently or intensely, where I could be in a room like this talking to people, and we would be sharing something, and say, you might have shared something about someone being ill, or maybe I just had a thought, and then what I call the roar of trauma would just come roaring through my head and through my body, and I would be somewhere else. We would be sitting in the room, and I would be somewhere else with my fear of, but I've had that ache and pain, and I've been ignoring it, and what if, and then away my mind would go. And then how I would have to really work to bring it back.
You spoke about the rhythm of the chemo regimen and the rhythm of that. And when that ends, and as Red said, you're pushed into this next piece, it has its own rhythm.
It does.
And those rhythms are really tied to the scans, aren't they?
Very tied. So for me, it was 6 months follow-ups, and I still have them. And initially, I have them, summer and winter. And 4 weeks, 6 weeks out, that roar of trauma, the waves were just, I often felt like I was just, barely hanging on. My husband would get a lot of those. I actually would almost be breaking down on a daily basis during those times. Now it's probably a few weeks out I start to have them, so it's like a little less. And I can often steady myself more through that time. I still rely on him, but I can probably, it's probably 50-50 now, where he probably had to do it 90% of the time back then. And now I can it's probably more like 50-50. But yeah, so you go through that. And then what would happen is I'd have the scan, I'd have the all clear, good checkup. And then when I'd have aches and pains after that checkup for the first month or two, I could say to myself, but it's okay. You just had your scans, you had the blood work, she did the physical, the aching hip is just the aching hip, right? But then the further out I would get from that, then I would say, it's pretty far out though now. And what if the aching hip is not the aching hip? And so then that's when the preoccupation would come up. And, and with those that I trust and that I don't feel judged by, I would say it out loud. And because I was just so aware that I couldn't trust what I was perceiving because of that threat detection system, right? Like that is the legacy of trauma. The legacy of trauma means our nervous system is always looking for danger. And so it thinks the aching hip is danger. And so what I needed people to say, whose judgment who I also didn't feel like were being cavalier, could say, no, Julie, it's this, right?
The duck is just a duck.
The duck is just the duck. Yeah.
Beyond those pieces of how life changed for you, and you're right, that trauma, that heightened threatening, that's just a way of life, and it doesn't have to get in the way now. But what else has it done to you as a person? How is Julie different because of that experience and the continuing pieces of that experience?
It's a great question, and I'm going to get both of you to also answer that as people who know me. a couple things. So one is I'm protective of my health in a way. You know, I returned to my job, and I left my job after returning to my job after like 7 or 8 months, because actually it was a bit longer than a year, because I was just like, I don't feel like these are the right conditions for my healing and my ongoing health. You know, you get perspective, of course, like all those things, you know, around material goods and money. The one thing I started saying to my husband is like, so retirement's guaranteed to no one. And while I want us to have good common sense about retirement, I also don't want to wait to live my life for retirement, right? I live with an awareness of the precarity of death for myself, with others, that I never had before. I live with the knowledge that this belief that we have control is all an illusion. It's an illusion. And I had that feeling that I had more control in my life. And even the things that we think we have control, even over our health, if we do the right things and we eat healthy and we exercise, it's not, it helps, but it's not foolproof, right? We're not bulletproof. And so I think that I can work with kind of, I think I sometimes in my mind now live a little more out on the fringes than I used to. I have more of a spiritual life in me. I think things deeply. And I think probably one of the biggest things is Kelly Corrigan, who's had cancer. She's a journalist and writer. She says cancer is a growth hormone for empathy. And there's just no doubt about it. I would like to believe that I was an empathic, compassionate person prior to cancer, but I just sit differently with people now. I feel into situations deeper. I'm moved by life, by people, by their suffering, but also by like beauty and joy. You know, it just, so it's all of it, like the human suffering, but also like the awe, right? And I will say, when I came out of treatment and started to feel better, I felt like almost giddy high for quite a while. Like everything felt beautiful. Colors felt more powerful. The things my kids said and did. And like, I just felt like there was joy waiting at every moment in my life back then. Unfortunately, that stalled a bit. But there was just this awesome beauty to life that I almost felt drunk on. So there's that, but then there's also just I'm less judgmental. Even when I am judgmental, I can move away from that quicker. I don't hang on so tight the way that I did. I still have a ways to go with that, as most of us do, but it softened me. And I'm glad for that. I think I'm a better person for it. What would you guys say? How's it changed me? Well, people who know me.
I think, and I'll need to just say this explain it a bit, but I think you've lost the drivenness, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. I think that what gives you energy and pushes you in life is not a drivenness to succeed, in a way. And I think, I know that there were many reasons, even when you went back to work and you had that great time. I know there were many reasons to make a change that weren't just that piece. But I also recognize the courage to make those changes were really part of your experience, mm-hmm. and that there was a push rather than a drivenness. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm explaining that well,
no, I would agree.
But I think your life took on a different way of moving. Mm-hmm.
Can I say that it's like priorities changed that then made your decision making a little different, maybe? in terms of career and family and life. Just that sense of shifting priorities meant that, because you don't want to say taking someone, having less drive is a good thing. It kind of sounds negative, but
what drives us.
Yes, exactly. It was what was the fuel you were using, and where was the destination that then became important, as opposed to full throttle moving through.
The other thing I would also say is that it made me quieter. I spend more time by myself than I used to.
Isn't that interesting? Because you were afraid to be by yourself.
Yeah, but that
before.
That was so different that time. Now I crave time by myself, but that's because I was in terror back then, right? Having people with me was because they made me feel safe. Now that I feel safer in my body, now I need more time, and some of that is because of the emotional load I still carry from it. And that has changed over time. So I'm almost 5 years out from diagnosis, not quite, but I would say the first 3 years, 3.5 years, I felt very raw. I felt very emotionally raw still. And so when I felt like my outside world didn't maybe understand or couldn't make room for it, it was like I just felt like I had to retreat. I felt like I've needed to retreat more. Because the other thing is, at a certain point, the people in my life just need me to be okay, right? And what my husband has said, because it's been hard for me when I have felt that, he just says, it's because they look at you, Julie, and they just see that you're okay and you're healthy. They're not trying to diminish. They're not trying to diminish how you feel. But I think, for me, I still felt like I was still carrying the legacy of trauma from it. Mm-hmm. So there's just been work there for me to do, which I think I've done. Yeah.
And I think there's always that challenge for all of us who have people in our life who are living that cancer piece. That just what you said there, Julie, that we want to celebrate their wellness. We want to thank God they're here and have that sense of joy, but to also recognize that there's going to be moments there where that anxiousness is going to come again, coming up to scans, anniversaries, even physical things that happen, and to recognize that, I don't want a Pollyanna experience where everything is wonderful. I want to keep those things in tension. And I don't want to be negative either. I don't want to, always be thinking of that possibility. So I think for all of us in that, you've given us that sense of this is a healthy approach, is to celebrate and to live well, and yet to recognize that there's still those moments that people are going in their journey of cancer that are going to be faced with. And we need to give space for that.
Yeah, so space to it all, right? Much like we've said in so many of our episodes for whatever it is can we just give space to the human experience, knowing that it changes and it fluctuates, and also there's my own responsibility to give myself space to that. And so that's part of what I said when I say I need more time alone. It's also I write more now, I journal, I spend time in meditation, I walk a lot by myself, and some of that is just to give myself that space.
Anything that you've written you'd like to share with us?
Well, I did bring something. I went to a writing workshop, I think it was last winter, and part of the writing workshop called out to me because I know that I need space to still keep, working my way through it. And one of the activities we did was, one of those really quick ones. You've got 5 minutes to write and, uncensored. And the title, what she said was, imagine that the bell is ringing and what set you off. It's basically the bell is ringing in your life. What set you off? And here was mine that I wrote. My bell was cancer. It screams. It shouts. It's my dark passenger. It's both my ally and my nemesis. It tells me to recognize the preciousness of this time, to let petty thoughts and actions go, even though petty thoughts remain. It says, slow down. Life is to be taken in and swallowed. It's not to be pushed through. It says, remember the precariousness. It whispers that to me in the fearful, vulnerable moments. It reminds me in the joyful moments too. It's all so precarious. It says, keep showing up for yourself. Don't betray yourself now. The journey has been too hard and too long to abandon yourself now. It says, be soft with yourself and with others. Life is so hard, so don't make it harder. It says, your work here is not done. You are on the right path. Keep your eyes open, and the next part of the path will appear. It whispers, all is well, however it turns out. Wherever this leads, all is well.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, so that just raised a question for me. Sorry, it's such a lovely way to end. But how has your relationship then? I think of that concept of death being our constant, invisible companion.
Our dark passenger.
How? That's what caught me there. How has this experience for you changed your relationship with that dark passenger, with that constant, invisible companion, and to life? Because they're two sides of the same coin, right?
It
They're
is.
just. But how has that changed your relationship?
Well, I'm still in a debate with my dark passenger. So because when you're going through cancer treatment, everything is about your survival. We want so hard to survive and to keep living. And I do, and I did. And yet at some point in the unpacking of all of this, I realized that some of the way I could find peace through the trauma was to start making peace with the dark passenger, was turning towards death, not because I want it or want to invite it in, but maybe to confront or dialogue with death and to say, okay, it sits here too, right? I hope my life continues to sit here and continues to unfold, but also can I make more peace with the fact that, yes, at some point too, I shall die. And can I learn to like not hold so tightly to it? So hold tightly to my life and the preciousness of it, but also at the same time loosen my grip around that. I don't know if any of that's making sense. Mm-hmm. So actually this past year, I'm actually in a course called A Year to Live, where we practice like imagining that we only had a year to live, and how would we spend that year, and how would we kind of look at our dark passenger. And I'm doing that because I don't want to live whatever time I have left just trying to outrun something that I can't outrun. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to look at it and say, yes, you're here, and I'm afraid of you at times, but I also don't want to keep trying to outrun this and try to outrun the anxiety of it. Yeah. So it's both, Red. It's like I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that anxiety is gone, but I'm trying not to avoid the anxiety.
Right. You've turned toward it.
When I can.
And I think that's an important thing for people, and no matter what the situation, whether they've had a cancer diagnosis or not, is that...
Or whether they've just had somebody die in their life.
Yes.
Right? Death anxiety comes up for us when somebody has died in our life. It reminds us of, I too.
Yeah. I don't want to get into the whole terror management theory, but you could get into something like that. But that sense of, as people, we need to really come to terms with the fact that that's present. No matter what our situation is, that dark passenger is there, and that it's with us, and we need to talk about it. We need to support each other to take a look in that direction, and kind of then have that help us inform how we live, right, and the people that we want to be in our lives.
So, allow me to do the wind up tonight,
please, David,
in a way that, first of all, to say thank you, Julie, for helping us and being vulnerable and being honest. And I'm sitting here just in gratitude to you, not just for your story, but for who you are and how this has impacted you has spilled over into your life and how it impacts others. So I'm so grateful for that. I'm also very conscious that people who will be listening to this, that there will be some in their life who won't find the survival, and that cancer will, that dark companion will be there.
And I just want to say, I'm so aware of that too. As I sit here and I talk about my trauma and the legacy of that, I'm so aware that there are people that don't get to work with the trauma of this.
Right.
And I want to honor that.
And that's what I want us to do, is to honor both. But I think to hear you is also, because I think when that first stage of diagnosis happens, we need these stories. We need this hope. We need to hear that in order to know, until we can no longer know, right? That's the journey but that's the journey for all of us. But I do want to say thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability and the gratitude that we share, that because I don't want to do this podcast with just Red. All right. So I'm just saying that.
Can I just say thank you for letting me.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for letting me tell this story. Thank you for those who will listen, because like anything, this is part of my story, but we all have stories, right? Of things through life. And we do need to tell our stories, and we do need to know that they matter to people and that people will listen. And so it matters to me a lot that the two of you are sitting here and listening, and that, I don't know, maybe a couple others might too.
Great.
Yeah. And that we all have our own story.
We all have our stories. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any last words, Red?
Yeah, David, I would just concur with everything that you have said. Thank you, Julie, for sharing your cancer journey with us. It takes a lot of courage to sort of relive that and walk through that. And it's just been an honor and a privilege to be there with you tonight and hear your story. Is there anything left that you want to say, Julie?
Yeah, thanks, Red. There is actually one thing I'd like to say, and that is, throughout the sharing of the story tonight, I keep referring to the people, the two of you and all of my other people in my life that got me through this. We've mentioned the threshold, and I just want to give a shout out to those people who carried me, loved me, cared for me, supported me across that threshold, and hence and forward from there. And so they know who they are as they listen to this, and I want to just take a moment and honor them, and anybody else listening to this who may be doing that for someone. That's how we make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for listening to What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. Music by Paradise Garage. Technical support provided by Sean and Jonah Heikert. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio. You can find more episodes of What Now for free on most major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. If you want to support us, please follow and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And tell your friends. It does make a difference.